Savvy Business Radio, drawing out the best from our guests with our host, Christina Nichman.
Our guest today is Jeff Kirkham. Jeff has served almost 29 years as a Green Beret, doing multiple classified operations for the U.S. government. He is a proverbial brain behind the ReadyMan survival tools and products, and is also the inventor of the Rapid Application Tourniquet, RATS. Today, Jeff shares his latest novel, Black Autumn, a post-apocalyptic saga. Get his book today at blackautumn.com and find out more about his tools at readyman.com. Hi, Jeff. Welcome to Savvy Business Radio. It's such a blessing having you here today. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you betcha. I was blessed when Joshua told me about you and the book you've just written and put out, Black Autumn, a post-apocalyptic saga.
It was a blast writing it.
Wow. And for the audience, share with them a little bit about your background. You have a tremendously fascinating background. You've been 29 years with the Green Beret, and you've served as a warrior for many years, and then now you've written this book. Share a little bit about your background. What brought you to the Green Berets, and what kind of brought you to writing a book or having the idea to write a book?
Well, I actually have a very non-typical career, and so that spanned over 28 and a half years. So I joined up back in 1987, and then just finished up here a few years ago, retired. And so it was phenomenal. I mean, a lot of it was luck, right place, right time, just ready to accept, opportunities when they came up. Traveled all over the world, teaching, local forces, how to defend themselves. And then, of course, 9/11 happened. I had actually gotten off active duty, and I was in the National Guard. There's Special Forces is very strong in the National Guard. We've got 19th Group and 20th Special Forces Group, and so I had gone to 19th Group, when I was a special agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration for about 4 years, and then the war kicked off, and I was on the invasion. We were mobilized, and then went on the invasion of Iraq, and so, and I was a team sergeant on an A team, and realized, man, I really missed working with special operations. So about that time, I got recruited into a counterterrorist unit. So I went back on, working full time in special operations, and somehow racked up between 2003 and 2015. So I was in the unit about 12 years and 13 years. And I was one of the guys. There'd be 2 or 3, 4 Americans, and we'd have, anywhere from 100 to 300 of the host nation guys that we'd recruited and trained, and then we'd lead, train, and advise them going out on targets in support of the global war on terrorists. I did that in both Afghanistan and Iraq, and somehow racked up 8 years total, 8 years boots on the ground over there. And so towards the end of that, it was started moving on, realizing I was getting long in the tooth, and when I fell down, it hurt for for days and days, and a bunch of old injuries were adding up and taking their toll, and it was time to move on. About that time, I wrote a book for small unit leaders planning, and then I also wrote another book for Stackful Books, was the 14th edition of the Combat Field Leaders Guide, where I wrote that, which was really cool because it was a book that I always saw when I was, going through my years in the military. So for them to reach out to me and ask me to write that was really a big honor. And then, so we started off, once I got out and was like, all right, I'm going to become an entrepreneur, and linked up with some other guys. We started up a few businesses together. Some of them did well, some of them not so well, but the biggies that you've probably heard of are ReadyMan. So we do emergency preparedness. We have over 1,000 tutorial videos where we help teach people, emergency preparedness skills and self-reliance skills, stuff like that. It's a blast, and it's everything from gardening to close quarter battle. And then I also stood up RATS Tourniquet. I'm the inventor of the Rapid Application Tourniquet system. And so that's going, and we sell that thing worldwide. And then also about that time, we started Black Rifle Coffee Company. And
you work with Black Rifle? I love their coffee.
Yeah. And I'm one of the, there's a core group of us that got it up and running, and, and now it's a behemoth. And so one of my business partners who I was in special forces with is Evan Hafer, and he's the CEO and running that. And so I said I'm a silent partner. I do new product development for Black Rifle, as well as the ReadyMan products. Most of those were designed and developed by me, and then just RATS. So that's essentially how I got here. And
that's amazing.
One of my other partners, who's also my co-author, Jason Ross, we were sitting up at his place one day, and he's a dyed-in-the-wool prepper and a prepper survivalist, and is really deep into it. So he's never been in the military, never been a police officer. So he started asking me, and he said, "Hey, how do you think an event could take place that could cause the United States to stumble?" And so I said, "Well, I think X, Y, and Z could cause that to happen." And over the course of a couple of weeks, we were talking about that, and I had started writing another sci-fi novel when I was in Afghanistan, just as a means of kind of decompressing.
Yeah.
And I showed it to him, and he was like, "Man, we should write down this stuff about that we're talking about in case of, that could cause a collapse." And so that was about 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, where we actually started working on what became Black Autumn, and wrote it, rewrote it, beat it up, argued over it, threw it on the shelf for a while, and then about a year ago, we read one of the final versions, and we both were like, "Well, let's send this out to our member base. Let's send it out to our fan base on ReadyMan and see what they think." So we sent out about 100 to 150 of the pre-edited versions, and everybody came back and said, "This is one, it's terrifying because holy cow, I could see how that could happen, and two, boy, this is really good. You guys should publish this." And so we went through the process, and we're like, "Okay, well, let's publish it. People say they like it, and and if this is what it takes to kind of get them off their butts and get off the couch and start helping themselves for self-reliance." And so we wrote the book, and we had so much. We had written so much in the first book that we ended up chopping a bunch of it out and starting a companion novel that's going to get released very close to Black Autumn. So we've got Black Autumn and Black Autumn Travelers, and we're also about 80%, 85% done with the sequel to Black Autumn. And so, and it's been a blast. You just sit there and war game stuff out and figure it out and say, okay, what's the most probable threat that we're going to have to deal with? So that's where it all came from.
Well, this is amazing. First thing I was asking before when you were talking, and then you answered my question, was age playing a factor in you doing the job in the military? And you were saying, after a while I started to feel the pain more. And because as I'm getting older, things I could do in my 20s, unfortunately, are not as easy now as I get near my 50s. But I really love the fact that you've done so much great businesses. Emergency preparedness is such an amazing thing. There's a couple of people, organizations in New York City are even doing that. Like, what do you do to prepare even in the city? Were you founders of Black Rifle Coffee?
Yes. Yeah, Evan and I got that thing up and cranking, and when it was very fledgling, and then Matt Best and Jared Taylor came in not too long after that, and they really threw gas on the fire and helped get things really moving. And so, but when it was just a super small thing that just kind of took on a life of its own.
Yeah, it's amazing. Anyone who wants to get a coffee that not only tastes super amazing and will jolt you up and give you a great yummy fix in the morning, you want to go to Black Rifle and get your coffee there. I've gotten a mug from them, a cup from them, and then support veterans because it's a veteran-owned company that got started. So you're supporting American workers and veterans. So it's awesome coffee. I highly recommend it. So it's just, it's funny. I drunk their coffee saying, I have to get a hold of the founder. I just love their coffee. And I kept forgetting. And look, it's serendipitous that we were introduced to each other. But I also love the fact that you created this book that allows people the option to go like, okay, here's what could happen, but we're not powerless. We can do something about it. And also, I wanted to ask you as well, what was your greatest takeaway as being a warrior the past several years? What is the greatest takeaway being in the military, helping people prepare for war? What have you learned through all your training, your greatest lesson?
I think first and foremost, probably, and this goes back to, I've written 2 books on military planning at the small unit tactics level. And then that ultimately we put together on ReadyMan, we have we provide a ton of free videos and stuff to folks so that they can get on that for tutorial stuff. But, our crown jewel is the Plan to Survive, and it's plan number 2, survive. So plantosurvive.com. And it's, it's a paid membership. I mean, obviously we got to keep the lights on and stuff, but it is 17 to 15. Let's see, we're about 1,600 skills and pieces of gear that we've gone over or that we talk about. And what it does, it's an engine that's highly customizable to people. So if you live in the city or you live in the rural, you live in the South, you live in the mountains, and you go through and you pick what your probable threat is. Is it hurricane? Is it, epidemic? Is it, whatever it is, earthquake, wildfire? And then what's your budget and what's your fitness level? And how many family members do you have? And so it goes through there. It's highly customizable to the person. And then what that allows them to do is it gives you a visual representation of where you're at on your level of preparedness. So to answer your question, nothing, the single biggest thing I learned in the military and being successful and, fortunately, came home with all my fingers and toes and was planning. And so we would spend hours planning, trying to figure out ways to get into targets without getting into gunfights. As soon as a shot gets fired, then all bets are off, and you're throwing the dice because even the bad guys get lucky from time to time. So we'd spend hours just planning of ways of how do we get in here and how do we get everybody out without, and the best way to do that is to get in there, grab the bad guy where nobody even knows that you're there, and get back out. And they just wake up the next morning and go, oh, Bob is gone. The Americans must have come and grabbed him. And so, still planning. And so that's why I bring up the plan to survive, because it's a planning engine to help people to get prepared. Because as we were going through it, there's just so many things to take into consideration that trying to think of it all off the top of your head is a monumental effort. You can do it. There's plenty of people that have, but we wanted to create something that made it so that anybody, wherever level they're at, top survivalist all the way down to just, a mom worried about her kids living in suburbia saying, what can I do to help get myself a little bit better prepared? And that's ultimately where Black Autumn came from. Black Autumn was just a big wargaming exercise for us of like, okay, if we think, if this is what we think is going to happen, then how would that affect us locally in our area, and how would we react to this, and what are the threats, and what are the dangers, and what's the food, and what's the water, and what's the power, and disease, and or you can just run. And that's where it took us 3 years to write the thing, because by the time we think we'd get close, and we're organizing the Plan to Survive and building that out about the same time, one of our members would come in and go, hey, have you guys thought about this? And they'd be like, oh my gosh, we hadn't thought of that. And so we'd go back and come up with solutions to stuff like that and put it into the Plan to Survive and just keep rolling. So to answer your question, that's kind of a long-winded answer, but to answer your question, planning, without a doubt, planning.
Yeah. And that is so important. It doesn't matter where you are, even in a corporate office, if things are not well constructed and planned out, you're going to run into catastrophe if you just kind of, as they call it, wing it. Winging it often doesn't work. Very, very often, I say probably 99.9% of the time, does not work if you don't have a strict plan of action on how to get into something. Now, what do you think the greatest myth is around the whole idea of planning for a disaster? I think people often, when I've talked about, stuff like this with people, they're like, the idea seems a bit scary. Well, let's just not look at it. If they don't look at it, it doesn't exist, and it's not a problem until it is one day. What do you think some of the misconceptions or myths around planning are?
I think the biggest myth that people think about is, and the preppers and the survivalists are probably the most guilty of this, is they have this myth of, well, I'm going to put on my backpack and I'm going to go into the mountains and survive off of what's in the mountains. And we repeatedly tell people that we're like, that is, you're up late at night. It's not sustainable. You may be able to go up there for a little while, but I mean, even Kaczynski, when he was being a hermit, the Unabomber was being a hermit in a cabin, he was still sneaking off to Walmart or whatever place was around there so that he could get resupplied. And you look, and we go through historically quite a bit and look at it. And we say, okay, when was this a problem in the past? What was the solution? What were people doing prior to that? And even the mountain men that ranged across, the West when they were out fur trapping, even they would go in there and they would trade with the Native Americans. They would come back to rendezvous. They would go to trading posts. Even those guys, needed supplies. So I think the biggest myth is, you're going to head to the mountains and you're going to be fine. And then I think the second biggest thing, if I may, just kind of a follow up, the second biggest thing that most people are not prepared for is the level of exhaustion that's going to take place.
Huh.
Yeah, because you figure a climatic, a catastrophic event that takes place, stress level goes up. If you've ever been stressed, you're burning energy then too. So then you have emotional stress, you have psychological stress, as well as you have physical stress, because you're going to end up working probably like you've never worked before in your life. So like we've got a good friend of ours that was just in Florida a year ago when the hurricane was hitting. He woke up early in the morning and he called us afterwards. He's like, Jeff, it was just like what you said. He had woken up early that morning so that he could get things organized at his work. And then he was planning on leaving the next day, worked all day. And then about 8 o'clock at night, realized, holy cow, I've got to get me and my family out of here now.
Yeah.
So spent the next hour loading up his car as fast as they could, and then driving. And the drive that normally took 5 hours took them 12 hours to go. And he was, because there was so much, everybody else had the same idea. They're like, holy cow, we got to get out of here.
Yeah.
And so he was in bumper to bumper, and they're racing, trying to get ahead of the storm. And he was like, it was just like you said, the level of exhaustion was staggering, because I'd gotten up, I'd worked all day. It doesn't, calamity doesn't happen when you're well rested, well fed, and all of that. It happens when you least suspect it, when you're least prepared. And then all of a sudden you end up working, like a dog, trying to help yourself. And then you have this huge emotional drain, psychological drain, as well as physical drain. So I think that's the second thing, that the majority of people are just not ready for the level of exhaustion.
Wow. This is fascinating, because I never considered this myself. When I grew up, my family was very concerned, and we would get this in school. You probably remember, if you're old enough, we had in school, duck and cover, go under your desk in case there's a nuclear bomb. I was like, okay, let's go do that. But my mom was always concerned. We didn't have a basement, but she would build like a whole bunch of food storage that she would buy like hundreds of tuna if they went on sale. And so we had this crazy pantry in the garage.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was great, except sometimes you wouldn't pay attention to them. They'd already go bad because they do last. There is a shelf life, even though it's a longer shelf life. They keep on top of how long the food is, and now we got to get rid of it. But she was more prepared than a lot of people in that she would think about putting away water, keep it in the garage so there's extra water if something happens. Very important thing to think about. But I love that you mentioned the running to the mountains, because I think often there's things that are going wrong in our lives. We think if we go to a quiet place away from the catastrophe, all of a sudden magically things are better. And not so. If you're in the city like me, I know nothing about mountain life. I would know no way to live in the mountains and how to take care of myself, start a fire, or get game. I would have no clue. So it wouldn't end things. And then the exhaustion thing, most of us, including myself, sit on my butt all day long, and I don't move a lot. And that is like most Americans. We're not physically active to the point where when something like what you're mentioning happens, how do we, as you said, it's not only emotional draining or psychologically draining, but now it's draining our body, a body we don't use like that on an everyday basis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why probably number three on that, number one is planning. Number two is, steel yourself for the level of exhaustion. Mm-hmm. And then number three is have a community. And you could probably, and these aren't necessarily chronological, mm-hmm. In order of importance, because you need to do all of them, but it's have a community. And when we've gone back and we've looked at historically, I lived in Afghanistan for literally for years. And I lived in Iraq, for a couple of years. And then I've been all over the world. I've been to Africa. I've been all over the world, working with some of these places. And overwhelmingly, if we look at the people that do the best, the people that survive or tend to, or even thrive, are the ones that have community around them, because you just can't do it all yourself. You've got doctors, and you've got plumbers, and you've got electricians, and you've got people that just, can carry heavy things, and people that can scrounge and scavenge. And so it takes a community and a variety of skill sets to be able to, survive or just be ready. And so that's where we tell folks it's built into the plan to survive. There's a communication network that's in there that our members can get in there and chat with each other. But it's build that community, because boy, when you may run out of water and the guy next door happens to know how to do water filtration, or it may be scary, and the guy down the hall, you can count on, because he knows how to fight, or he knows how to defend himself and others, or it may be, man, something broke, but we know that, this gal down over here is really good at fixing, stuff that we're going to end up needing. And so just having that community is essential.
Mm-hmm. I like that you mentioned that, Jeff, because I think in today's modern world, we get so stuck on the idea that, self-reliance, I don't need anyone, especially in city life. I find that often people are like, I got the store down the street, who needs neighbors? I used to joke when I lived in Manhattan. Now I'm in Brooklyn in a lovely building where everyone actually knows each other's names. We talk to each other. There's a communal table. If we're throwing something out, we put it on the table. But when I lived in Manhattan, I used to joke that if I ever died overnight in my apartment, I probably would not find me until I smelled bad enough for neighbors to call, to open that apartment because it smells so bad. But that's how sad and disconnected it is. And I think people sometimes forget the importance of community, that it doesn't make you less than to have to depend on a neighbor or your community. It actually makes you greater. Your parts are separate, are not as strong as all the parts coming together.
Absolutely. And think about it like this. As human beings, we're social animals. That's the reason why we've gotten to the top of the food chain. Isn't because we're the smartest. It isn't because we're the strongest. It isn't because we're the fastest. It's because we build communities. We're attracted to each other. But you think about, if we have people in prisons and they get in trouble, what is the most severe level of punishment that we give them? We put them in solitary confinement.
Yes. Because
human beings were social animals, and that's where, going back to what you would ask me before, what do you think the single biggest myth is? And I was like, single biggest myth is somebody thinking that they're going to go up into the mountains and live by themselves for the rest of their life. just isn't going to happen. I mean, if you look at the survival show alone, a lot of those folks, they run into hardship. You know, obviously they're living in hard circumstances. So now what we've done is we've psychological, emotional, and physical stress that we've put them under. And then the majority of the people find an excuse to quit versus just saying, I just can't handle it, because they're out there by themselves. It's unbelievably difficult. And then that's the other part of having a community, is not just skills and barter, but it's that social support that people need, because everybody has bad days. And then, man, it's really nice that you come home from, you know, a bad day and your wife or your husband's there to help pick you up, or your kids, you know, or even your dog, you know, it's like, okay, now emotionally and psychologically, it's like, okay, things aren't quite as bad as they could be. I'm going to be okay. And so that's where we harp on this over and over again, is build your community, build your community, build your community.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's true. Anyone who thinks, I know I wouldn't do well in solitary. And even here in Savvy, there's a wonderful community of, the reason I started the show is I started a business and I didn't know a lot of stuff. So I originally said, hey, maybe if I start the show, other people who know other stuff I don't know will help me, and I could use their expertise and wisdom to build my business. And so, you know, like you said, everyone will have a piece of the puzzle that they're great at, whether it be sales, marketing, you know, electronics, whatever it be, that if we come together as a community, we can all use our skills to help each other grow, or in your, you know, be prepared or safe, or, you know, just back each other up.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you mentioned something else that I thought was interesting, is a community. When you think about the greatest buildings, a bridge, anything great built, it wasn't built with one person. It was built by a whole bunch of people. Architects sit down and plan with engineers how to build a building or a bridge. And then a whole bunch of 3-pound brains come together and make it happen, along with the construction workers and everyone that put it together. It didn't happen by one person doing it.
I think it was Milton Friedman that, you know, he wrote the book Free to Choose, phenomenal economic and economist. And he the example that he gave, you know, he was teaching a lesson about economics, but the example that he'd give was, no one person knows how to make a pencil. So if you think about a pencil and how simple of a device that pencil is, no one person knows how to make that pencil, because somebody's got to know how to cut down the tree, and somebody's got to know how to run the lumber, and then somebody's got to know how to make the rubber for the eraser, and somebody's got to know how to extrude that, and somebody's got to know how to mine the tin that holds that eraser in place and then form it. And so just exactly what you're saying is, you take something as stupid simple as a pencil. No one person knows how to make that same thing. And that's where it's like, it takes that community to really, you know, that's the difference between essentially starving to death and thriving. So there was that great movie that just came out a few years ago that was called Defiance, where it was about the Jews that had escaped the ghetto and lived in the forest. And while the Germans were, while the Holocaust was going on, and it was 100 or so of these people were living in the forest, hiding from the Germans. Now, mind you, there's a full-fledged war, the most horrific war that we know of in the history of the world, was going on all around them, and they managed to survive and actually do pretty well in that forest during those years, because they had that community where everybody could watch out for each other.
And you mentioned a very important thing, Jeff, that the key to this is that anything you're going to do in life, you cannot do it alone. The myth of, you know, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and, you know, make it happen yourself is a myth. It's not the all-American dream. It's not all-American. What is coming together in community. The idea that you could do it yourself is not true. No one did anything great. It doesn't matter if it was a business, a bridge, or surviving the Nazis by themselves. And what's awesome about the story you're mentioning is that they thrived. They didn't just do well. They thrived together. And that's what's amazing in your business. If you come together and you get great people that all have different skill sets and you come together to work in community and in a great, where you're not going to be fighting against each other, but you use each other's skills and really meld together, you will thrive together, all of you, not just one of you.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's
so
right.
That is like the biggest takeaway I'm getting right here from that. But also, what was, from all your time spent abroad and working with so many different cultures and people, I now have talked to people all around the world. I had a call a couple of weeks ago from someone in Moscow. And I find that, people are not different. No matter where they are on the planet, whatever, what culture they have, there's a lot of similarities. What did you find in your travels? And what do you think is some of the biggest myths Americans might hold about different cultures?
Well, that's a great one. I think probably the biggest myth that Americans have is they think everybody speaks English. and if you speak louder and slower, that somebody will magically be able to understand you. As Americans, we're a little bit spoiled, and I'm happy and I'm sad about that. I've off and on studied about 6 different languages throughout my travels. I certainly do not speak six different languages, because as I'd learn one, then the other one would kind of fall off the other end of the bookshelf. I think probably the biggest thing that you run into is as Americans as a whole, we tend to have a lot of, it's funny, it's this weird juxtaposition of, we have a ton of pride in that we're an American, but we kind of like are embarrassed, about being Americans, and we're kind of embarrassed about our pride, and we're constantly trying to push that down, because, and if you think about, but we also think it's like everybody in the world wants to be an American, and it's really, it's one of those things where it's like, well, I think everybody in the world wants to enjoy what, the freedoms that we have as Americans. I don't know if everybody necessarily wants to be an American.
Yeah.
But I think that it's just, I think the biggest thing that we run into is that we tend to think that, everybody wants to be us, and it's like, no, they don't want to be us. They want what we have, but they're perfectly fine, in the culture that they have.
Yeah. Wow. It's cool that you brought this subject up, because we had a gal on a couple of years ago, and after the interview, we went for lunch, and she told me she worked with an organization that helps feed the hungry. And so she did a lot of time in third world countries, helping building communities, bringing food and water, and helping them set up like farms and stuff like that. And she said, being, I think, probably not even 20 years old yet, going over there, that she felt this sense of, oh yeah, I'm going to fix this problem. I'm going to help these poor people. And, she would go in there and speak to the elders, and they're like, no, we don't want you to come and fix stuff. We want the tools so that we can fix it. And we know, and so she learned, she said, the biggest lesson I learned coming back was that I didn't need to fix anyone. I need to help them build the tools so that they can continue to grow and be prosperous, but they didn't need me. And it was kind of like bringing that pride you're talking about, bringing that, oh yeah, we've got all the perfect answers here. And they're like, no, we got our culture down. We got our culture down. We just need like some tools to build this farm just right, but we don't need you to come here and just fix us.
And that's, the fact that she was 20 years old and had that, much foresight is actually, it's outstanding. I mean, it's staggering, because now listening to that, I would say, yeah, you know what, because I can't tell you how many times like we'd go in and we'd completely screw areas up, because we'd go in there and we're like, hey, we're going to fix this for you. And then we'd give them a whole bunch of money. And it's like, we're going to fix this. And we just start buying stuff, and it would just completely turn the economics of the culture that are there. It just turned it completely upside down. So now all of a sudden the poor people can't afford to buy any food, because inflation's gone through the roof, because Americans are running around with $100 bills paying for people. And it seems to be like some of the NGOs that are out there are like, no, we need to pay people what we would pay them as if they're in the United States. Yeah. And it's like, well, that makes a lot of sense on paper, but the reality is you're going to completely screw up their economy, because now you're going to cause hyperinflation. I saw that in Africa, where the UN had gone in and, it was paying off all these guys because, the UN is spending somebody else's money on somebody else. And so all of a sudden, they're not careful with it at all. And it would completely turn the local economies upside down. And so, and the poor people all of a sudden can't afford, a loaf of bread because the guy's like, well, I'm not going to sell you the loaf of bread because I could sell it to the UN, or I can sell it to the Americans for 10 times or 100 times of what I, end up selling it to that person. So very insightful for that gal to see that. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. And it's a great lesson for all of us to remember that there's great gifts that everyone have. And she said, if I listened, I actually learned there were better ways to do things sometime. So we have to come to the end. We're getting that ding telling us that time's coming to the end here on my show. But I don't want people to leave without finding out how they can get Black Autumn today. Where can they do that, Jeff?
You can get Black Autumn if you go to Amazon. We're on Amazon.com, and we're also on Barnes & Noble. And then after you get that, or you can go to blackautumn.com, and we've got a bunch of free offers that are on there where we're trying to help folks out. We've got some tutorial videos that are on there, and the companion novel, and and a couple of things that they can try and win. And so they can go to Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com, and then hit blackautumn.com and take advantage of the freebies that we have going out there for folks, like the companion novel.
That's awesome. Well, I have to thank you again, Jeff, for sharing your great wisdom today and your awesome book on Savvy Business Radio. Thank you.
Thank you.
Savvy Business Radio broadcasts worldwide via a large podcast network, celebrating business owners, entrepreneurs, influencers, and successful individuals. Find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or how to become a guest. Call 732-474-7375 or email Christina@savvybusinessradio.com.